Hi, everyone. Having a little technical difficulty. Happy New Year. Thanks for signing on. Uh, doesn't look good because it's our first broadcast for the year, but we're working on it. Just please be patient and we'll get back to you.
One.
Hey, everybody. I think we got it. I think we're back. The man who needs no introduction, Dr. Paul Loiselle, is about to start his presentation. Go ahead, Doc.
Buonasera, everybody, and Happy New Year. I hope everybody is hearing me, because in theory you do, but I have no feedback on this.
I hear you're coming through loud and clear, Doc. Perfect. Go ahead, Doc. Thank you,
Okay,
Dr.
the subject of today's program is a group of cichlids that's near and dear to my heart, because I did my master's thesis on these animals. And these are the cichlids of the genus Hemichromis. So what's in the name? Hemichromis means half chromis. And it's based on the fact that at the time that these animals were described, pomacentrids and cichlids were all considered to be one family, the Chromidae. And Hemichromis, half chromis, refers to the fact that these guys have only a single row of teeth in their jaws, where all the other described chromids at that time had more than one. Now, my suspicion is if Dr. Peters, who described the genus, had been familiar with the live animals, he would have not called them Hemichromis, which means half chromis. He would have called them Hemioliochromis, which means a cichlid and a half, or a chromis and a half, because they are definitely a handful of animals to deal with. They are an old group of cichlids. They cluster with chromatotilapines, palmetochromines, and tylochromines as what I wouldn't call them ancient cichlids, but archaic cichlids. The haplotilapines, haplochromis types, lamprologines, tilapias, and whatever, are much younger animals. The oldest, that clade is perhaps 11 million years old. Hemichromis and its affins are much older. There are two recognized genera of hemichromine cichlids. Hemichromis, with 20 plus species, and they're divisible into two groups. The Fasciatus group, these are medium-sized piscivores. Their color pattern is based on repeated large spots on the flanks. And the Bimaculatus groups, these are smaller fish. They're basically micropredators. And their breeding coloration features either intense red base coloration and or a lot of discrete blue spangling. These are the so-called red jewel fish. And the second genus is Amymalochromis, and these are basically dwarf hemichromine cichlids, and there's 3 recognized species. Okay, Hemichromis is a pretty distinctive group of fish. The most obvious difference, if you're looking at preserved specimens, are they have scales of the so-called Gothic type. Most cichlids have a Roman pattern where the circuli form a rounded arch. In the case of hemichromines, the arch is pointed, and that's a very distinctive feature. It sets these apart from essentially all other African cichlids. They have exclusively conical jaw teeth, and typically pseudocanine teeth are present. These are 2 teeth in the upper and lower jaw that are noticeably larger than the others. There is a tendency towards simplification of the jaw teeth. One species, Hemichromis cerezagaster, has 2 to 5 complete rows of teeth in both jaws. In all the other members of the genus, with rare individual exceptions, there is 1 complete and 1 incomplete row of teeth in both the upper and lower jaw. On the basis of dental characteristics, Hemichromis cerezagaster seems to be the primitive sister taxon of all of the hemichromine cichlids. They have 4 lateral line openings on the head and the lacrimal bone. 5 is the usual value in African cichlids. They're all bicustodially parental substratum spawners with very extensive care of the mobile fry. The eggs are typically deposited in a nice compact circular plaque. The juvenile coloration is based on 2 very conspicuous dark stripes on a lighter background. As long as that pattern is in place, the fry are highly social and they'll school tightly. As soon as that pattern starts to break up, they start fighting among themselves and they disperse. This is a widespread and successful genus of fish. They occur throughout West Africa. They formerly, I'm sure, occurred throughout what is now the Sahara Desert, which until 2,000 years ago was a much wetter place than it is now. One species occurs in the Nile Basin. There's a number of relict species throughout oases in North Africa. And one species, Hemichromis exul, managed to get to the other side of the Great Rift, and it occurs in Lake Turkana. All the other species of the genus occur west of the Great Rift system in East Africa. These are not particularly difficult fish to keep as long as you accept the fact that they need plenty of room. If you read a lot of the older aquarium literature, the red jewelfish is described as basically the cichlid from hell. Well, if you keep these fish in a 10-gallon aquarium, that's exactly what you're going to get. If you want to work with the Fasciatus group, the so-called five-star generals, 50 gallons is minimum size tank, and the larger the better. For the red jewelfish, 29 gallons. Try them in anything smaller than that, you're not going to have a happy outcome. You'll have a lot of dead fish. The Fasciatus group are very competent predators, and they're extremely intolerant of conspecifics at all times. Their behavior in that respect is very comparable to some of the Central American guapotes. Red jewels are reasonably tolerant of both conspecific and heterospecific tank mates when they're not breeding. However, they will eat smaller fish. Basically, the red jewelfish could almost be described as specialized cichlid fry predators in the wild, and they're very good at it. They're not picky about water chemistry. Generally, pH range of 5 to 7, 8 works nicely for them. Hardness up to 17 degrees DH. The one animal that can do better than that is the Lake Turkana jewelfish, Hemichromis exul. pH in that lake can go as high as 8.5, and it's a slightly saline lake. It's about 10% seawater. This would be the ideal jewelfish for people who live on Staten Island. They do not appreciate abrupt drops in pH, so buffer their water carefully. And like most cichlids, they do not like dissolved waste. Frequent partial water changes are really a key if you're going to keep these animals alive and happy. Temperature range, 72, 78 for normal maintenance. Kick it up to 82, 85 for breeding. They're not plant eaters, and they're not compulsive diggers, but if they're preparing a spawning site and preparing spawning pits, they may dig up rooted plants. They're not fussy eaters. If they can fit it in their mouth, live, frozen, or prepared foods are equally acceptable. I must say the big ones, the members of the Fasciatus group, do seem to do best if they can get live food, feeder guppies or something along those lines, as an occasional treat. Okay, the spotted jewelfish. 3 described species, Hemichromis fasciatus, Hemichromis elongatus, Hemichromis frempongii, and there are at least 3 undescribed species that need to be worked up more carefully. Fasciatus is the largest member of the group. It is easily recognizable because in addition to the 5 large black spots on the side, you have rows of smaller black dots on the scales. Red throat and breast, but the red coloration tends to be fairly limited. These are sexually isomorphic fish. The females are a little bit smaller than the males, but other than that, there's no real distinction in either color pattern or fin development. These guys can grow optimally to about 10 inches long. I've seen them that large in the wild, but it's very unusual for them to get that large. In captivity, 6 to 7 inches is not unusual. This is a very widely distributed species. It occurs all throughout West Africa in the Sudanian region. It gets into the Nile system. And one of the reasons that it is so widely distributed is that it will tolerate brackish water. You find these guys in coastal lagoons all the way from the Senegal River down to the Niger. This is like Aheme in Benin. This is typical Fasciatus habitat in that part of West Africa. Hemichromis frempongii is endemic to one crater lake in Ghana, Lake Basuntwe. And when I originally described this animal, I thought that I was looking at a smaller, more colorful, and less aggressive version of Fasciatus. Well, 2 out of 3 is not that bad. It is smaller, it is more colorful. It is most emphatically not less aggressive. All of these spotted Hemichromis really punch well above their weight. This is a very attractive fish. It is now in the hobby, largely due to the efforts of Oliver Lucanus. And if you want to start out with one of these animals, this is not a bad one to work with. And again, it's endemic to this one crater lake located in central Ghana. Hemichromis elongatus was the second species of the genus to be described. The type locality for this species is in Gabon, and this is the true Hemichromis elongatus. A great deal of red in throat and breast, a lot of red in the flanks, a lot of discrete metallic blue spangling on the flanks, nice clearly defined round black spots on the flanks. This animal is only now becoming available in the hobby. Oliver Lucanus has had them, and I know that it's being kept and bred in Europe. And as you can see, it's basically an East Ghanaian Congolese species. The species that we know as elongatus, or have known as elongatus for a long time, is an undescribed species that's native to Nigeria. A somewhat puzzling fish is the nominal elongatus that occurs in the Zambezi Basin. I've never seen this animal alive. This is basically a color plate from a book on the freshwater fishes of southern Africa. It has the red throat and breast, but the melanophore pattern is not typical of what you'd find in the Congo. I would suspect that once the DNA people start looking at these animals, this is probably going to fall out as a separate species. To the best of my knowledge, we have never had it in the aquarium hobby. And as you see, it basically occurs in the Zambezi system and probably got into the Zambezi via the Congo. I suspect this is probably if it's an undescribed species, it's almost certainly the sister species of the true elongatus. This is the animal we've been calling elongatus for many years. This animal occurs from essentially Togo through to the Cameroon border, very common in southern Nigeria. A very interesting fish. It undergoes some really amazing color changes in the course of its life cycle. Those black spots can disappear and become light against a black background. This is the so-called five-star general. Again, a fish that punches well above its weight. These are scary smart and really aggressive. An interesting fish to work with, but they are definitely not for the beginning cichlid keeper. Where they occur sympatrically with fasciatus, they are typically the fish that you'll find in swampy habitats or small creeks. The true fasciatus you tend to find in coastal lagoons and in larger rivers. And this is a typical habitat for that fish in southern Togo, Zio River marshes near the village of Kiligogan. This is a very strange animal. Morphologically, this keys out to be Hemichromis elongatus. This is not one of my photos. This is a photo that the late Erhard Roloff was kind enough to share with me. He brought these animals back from Sierra Leone. I do not have data on the breeding coloration, but on the basis of its non-breeding coloration, it certainly does not match any of the elongatus types. And morphologically, and I've looked at preserved material, it is most emphatically not fasciatus. So this is an undescribed species. This animal may have snuck in shipments of fish out of Guinea, but to the best of my knowledge, it's not presently in the hobby. And to the best of my knowledge, Roloff never bred it. Roloff was basically a killifish person, and he had very unkind things to say about this animal as a predator on Aphyosemion and Epiplates. And again, it's the westernmost representative of this particular complex of species. Red jewelfish, the Hemichromis cristatus group. There are 3 described species, cristatus, bimaculatus, and peni, and at least 3 undescribed ones. And the name derives from the fact that the teeth of the lower pharyngeal bone have this crested appearance on the minor cusp. And this is present to a greater or lesser extent in all the members of this particular complex. This is the lower pharyngeal bone of the type species of the group, Hemichromis cristatus. This is one of the smaller jewelfish. I've never seen one of these guys over 3 inches standard length for male, and the females are a little bit smaller. It's relatively unaggressive. It's a fairly easy fish to recognize because it has a perfectly circular small black spot surrounded by a lighter yellow zone in the middle of the flanks. It's unusual in that the females tend to develop a fair amount of yellow coloration on the lower part of the body when they're parental. It has a very restricted range. This is basically a southern Nigerian species. When I published my master's thesis, I assumed that it had a very extensive range and occurred all the way as far west as Guinea. At that time, all I had was preserved material to work with, and those animals definitely were very similar. No obvious distinguishing features. Having since seen live animals and kept live animals, I can assure you that they most emphatically are not the same animal as the typical population of cristatus from Nigeria. This is the cristatus analog that occurs in western Ghana. The original population of this fish was collected in the Ghanaian town of Ankasa, and that's the designation I've chosen to give it. This fish, to the best of my knowledge, is still in Europe. We had it over in this country and lost it. The most obvious distinguishing feature that separates it from cristatus is the fact that A, it's larger, and B, the old males develop a very recognizable nuchal hump. It's a very pretty fish. It would be nice to get it back into the United States. Again, it's moderately aggressive, a little bit larger, as I say, than cristatus, but in all respects, a very attractive aquarium fish. And again, as near as we can tell, this animal is endemic to extreme western Ghana. It's never been collected in the Pra system, and to the best of my knowledge, it's never been found in Ivory Coast, which is the next country to the west. This is the so-called Hemichromis guinea 2. This is basically, again, morphologically, keys out nicely to cristatus, but the color pattern is totally different. It is probably unusual in that its base color is yellow or gold, not red. The blue spotting is rather restricted. This again is endemic to the West African country of Guinea. It is available in the hobby. It appears periodically on online price lists. It's a fairly robust animal. The males can get up to 4.5 inches standard length. And again, by jewelfish standards, it's a fairly laid-back fish. And as you see again, it's the westernmost representative of this particular complex of species. Now, we have to deal here with what I call a long-standing misidentification. This is the aquarium strain of Hemichromis guttatus. And if you look at the older aquarium literature, this is invariably identified as Hemichromis bimaculatus. Note the shape of the lower pharyngeal bone. Note the shape of the teeth. This is the real Hemichromis bimaculatus. This is a much larger fish with a longer snout. It is endemic to the extreme West Guinean region. Very different pharyngeal bone. The pharyngeal bone is wider than it is long. The dentition is quite different. And you notice the color pattern is very deficient in blue spangling. This is what the animal looks like when it's much happier. It's a very attractive fish, but it's the largest of the red jewelfish. These guys will get up to 5 inches long very easily. Notice the longer, much more pointed snout. And again, a lot of red when the animals are happy, but very little blue. These particular animals were collected in Sierra Leone. The type locality for bimaculatus is Liberia. And most Liberian bimaculatus do look very much like this when they're preserved. Basically 2 black spots on a lighter background and a dark spot on the operculum. Now, this is a population of nominal bimaculatus from the sea mountains in central Liberia. This is a preserved animal, but it has a melanophore pattern unlike any other Hemichromis I've ever seen. I would love to get a hold of some live animals of these fish to see what they look like. Unfortunately, Liberia is not, shall we say, either the most comfortable or easiest country to do fish collecting in nowadays. And I keep hoping that Oliver Lucanus will be able to get one of his people on the ground in Africa into Liberia and collect some of these guys. But for the moment, that's an aspiration. But again, I would really like to see what these guys look like when they're alive, because certainly the melanophore pattern is very distinctive. And again, as you see, bimaculatus occurs in the extreme West Guinean region. It typically occurs sympatrically with the next species, Hemichromis payni. And these guys are a cristatus type jewelfish. They have that crested lower pharyngeal dentition, but they have molariform teeth. These guys are basically snail eaters in nature. The sexually quiescent animals do not win any beauty contests, but as is typical of most red jewelfish, they become quite attractive when they're parental. There's a fry-tending male up in the upper corner of the tank, and the lower animal is a ripe female. And these animals have been in the hobby in the past. Whether they're still in the hobby now, I don't know. I would suspect probably not, because as I say, when they're not breeding, they're not that attractive an animal. And again, they occur sympatrically with the true bimaculatus over much of their mutual range. The next group in the red jewelfish are the Guttatus group, and there are again 3 described species: Guttatus, Stellifer, and Cerezagaster, and at least 2 undescribed ones. This is the classical red jewelfish in the aquarium hobby, Hemichromis guttatus. It is a pair of the typical aquarium strain, which was originally exported from southern Nigeria. And then in the lower corner is a wild fish that I collected in Togo. And again, the diagnostic character on these guys is that lens-shaped spot in the middle of the body, typically surrounded by a lighter color zone. Now, we could possibly be looking at a species complex here. The type specimen of Guttatus was purchased by the British Museum from a professional collector, and he sent it from South Africa. So the type locality indicated on the type specimen is South Africa. Well, I'm sorry, South Africa is about 1,800 miles south of the southernmost known representative of the genus. We know from looking at the professional collector's itinerary, he stopped off at Accra in what is now Ghana and Lagos in Nigeria. So the type specimen was collected from either one spot or the other. My gut suspicion is it probably came from Nigeria. It would have been much easier for him to get the specimen there than if he had been working out of Accra. The reason this is significant is that the Ghanaian population of Guttatus is somewhat different. My gut suspicion is that, again, when the DNA boys look at these animals, we might well be looking at a pair of sibling species. The reason for that is that the Niger River, or rather the Volta River, bisects the range. So we have cisvoltaic and transvoltaic animals, and I suspect it's probably been quite a long time since those animals have been able to exchange genes with one another. In any event, I would strongly recommend in the aquarium hobby, because both of these populations are available, we manage the Ghanaian animals and the Nigerian animals as if they were separate species. They're both very attractive animals. They're very easily maintained. They're a little bit more belligerent than the members of the Cristatus group, but again, it's not an unmanageable problem as long as you give them plenty of room. Now, this is an animal that is frequently marketed as the blue jewelfish. I don't know whether this is simply a highly selected variant of Guttatus or whether it's a hybrid. It's not a bad-looking fish. It doesn't push my buttons. It is out there, and you should be aware of the fact that it's a rather distinctive-looking animal. And again, I would manage this as if it were a separate species. Hemichromis stellifer is probably a species complex. This is the red stellifer, which is not particularly well endowed with blue spangling, and in fact, it's not blue spangling, it's blue edging to the scales. These animals come from the Congo-Brazzaville and Gabon. And then this is the blue form. This is from Kinshasa, from the Democratic Republic, from Congo Kinshasa. And again, morphologically, you can't tell them apart, but the color pattern is quite different. And again, I suspect very strongly that once we look at the genetics and have a look at the DNA, this will probably turn out to be a species pair. They're not a particularly difficult fish to manage. I will say they tend to look better in somewhat softer water than a lot of the others do. And again, that reflects the sort of habitat they come from. But a very attractive fish. I tend to find the red animals a little bit more colorful than the blue, but that's more a matter of personal taste. And again, you can see the range of these animals. Cerezagaster is an anomalous animal. No black spot on the side, but they typically have a very distinct black blotch in the spiny dorsal. The males have a fair amount of blue, the females don't. The species name Cerezagaster means cherry belly, and if you look at that parental female, you can see that the animal definitely lives up to its name. When this animal was described, I suspect Boulanger was probably working with freshly preserved specimens that still had a fair amount of the life colors left. This animal is endemic to one lake in the central Congo. As I say, in many respects, it retains a lot of primitive characteristics. It's a very attractive animal, a little bit on the feisty side, but not unmanageably so. And certainly it's an animal worth keeping around. It's a CARES candidate, not because it seems to be in any particular trouble in nature, but because that part of the Congo is not the easiest part of the world for a collector to get into to get wild fish. We might have to wait a long time for wild specimens if we lose the ones we have in captivity now. And again, you can see that it's restricted to that one locality in the extreme central part of the Congo River Basin. The final member of the red jewelfish is the Letourneaui group. Again, 3 described species: Letourneaui, Exo, and Lifalili, and at least 1 undescribed species. Letourneaui was described from Lake Mariot, or Mariotis to give it its Greek name. This is a coastal lake next to the city of Alexandria in Egypt. This is most emphatically not a tropical fish. The climate in that part of Egypt is Mediterranean. It can get quite cold during the winter. These are Jorg Freyhof's photographs of topotypical parental fish, both male and female. Very attractive fish, but again, deficient in blue spangling. It's basically a red fish and with a lot of blue spangling in the fins. Now, morphologically, this animal has a tremendous range. It occurs all the way from the Nile River in the east all the way to the Senegal River in the west. This is a pair of the Niger River population. These fish are exported from Guinea. This is a sexually quiescent male up in the upper corner and a parental or ripe female in the lower. The West African animals, when they're not breeding, typically have this greenish base color with the red throat and breast. I'm very familiar with this animal from the Volta Basin, and that's, again, what the non-breeding animals look like. It is not without the bounds of possibility that, again, we're looking at a species complex. It's also not impossible that in some West African river basins, the populations of nominal Letourneaui are the result of hybridization with Cotatus. And again, it'll be interesting to see what the gene jockeys turn up with when they start looking at these animals. These guys have somewhat enlarged pharyngeal dentition. They are very fond of snails, and they will clean a snail infestation out of a tank quite efficiently. It may take them a while to do it, but they'll eventually clean them all out. And again, this is an animal with an extensive range. And again, it would not at all surprise me if some of these West African population have signs of genetic introgression with Cotatus. Exole is the Latin word for exile, and it stems from the fact that the type material of this animal was collected from Lake Turkana. It's the only hemichromis that occurs east of the Great Rift, and it was originally described by Ethel and Travis as a palmatochromis species. She subsequently corrected that misidentification, and it remains the easternmost outrider of the genus Hemichromis. It is unusual in that there's very little blue spangling in the body, quite a bit of blue spangling in the fins, and it alternates between a dark animal, which is brown, almost maroon, to a very bright red animal. It's an extremely placid fish. I have a group of a dozen of these animals right now. And normally when you're dealing with sexually mature red jewelfish and you have 12 of them in a 60-gallon tank, you would expect a certain amount of sparring, at least at feeding time. And you'd certainly see some attempt at breeding. Well, I'm quite sure I have both sexes, and they certainly have a robust appetite, but I've yet to see these guys spar off with one another, and they're absolutely innocuous towards the other cichlids that they're being kept with. So it's almost an anomaly, a peaceful jewelfish, but this, if you are looking for that, this is it. And again, for those of you who live on Staten Island, this is the fish for you, because the chemical makeup of Lake Turkana's water is almost identical to what comes out of the tap in Staten Island. A very attractive fish, and one that I'd like to see us keep around, again, because this is not the easiest part of the world to get animals out of. And you can see it's tucked way to the east on the other side of the Great African Rift. Lifalili is a species that I described. Lifalili is the Lingala word for red jewelfish in the Congo Basin. And this is a very attractive animal. A lot of loose spangling on a red background. Again, that round spot in the middle of the flanks with a lighter zone is pretty clearly diagnostic. A fair amount of population variation. The fish up on the upper corner was exported out of Kinshasa, and the lower fish came out of Bangui, which is in the Central African Republic. But again, you're talking about a red fish with a lot of blue spangling. Very attractive animal. Slightly on the aggressive side, a little bit more so than the Cristatus group, but again, not unmanageable. And again, it's basically a Congo Basin fish. It seems to be replaced in the rivers to the south of the Congo with this animal. Morphologically, it keys out to leafalili, and the color pattern is suggestive. But this is a much smaller animal. I've never seen one of these guys over 3 inches standard length for a male, and the females stop out at about 2 3/4 inches. It's a much less aggressive animal than the standard leafalili. A very, very pretty fish. It's been episodically available from online vendors. And again, it's a fish worth keeping around. That part of the world is not the easiest part of the world to get fish out of. So again, to me, this is a logical candidate for the CARES program. A very nice fish. If you want a good starter red jewel fish, this is a good one to work with. And again, you can see that it occurs, to the best of our knowledge, only in rivers to the south of the mouth of the Congo. Animalochromis. The reason animalochromis means anomalous cichlid. And the reason for that is that it has a mix of morphological characteristics that made it very, very hard to characterize. It was originally described as a haplochromis, and then it became a palmatochromis, and then it became a hemichromis. And finally, Greenwood said, all right, it's a hemichromine, it's clearly not hemichromis, now it's animalochromis. It has these typical cycloid scales of a hemichromine cichlid. They start out life with weakly bicuspid teeth, which is why it originally was described as a haplochromis. But the teeth become uniformly conical in adults. It does not have pseudocanines. Multiple rows of teeth in the upper and lower jaws. Again, the same cephalic lateral line pattern as hemichromis. They're biparentally custodial substratum spawners of, again, protracted care of the mobile fry. But their babies are not characterized by those two distinct black lines on a lighter background. They are very cryptically colored fry. Again, the eggs are deposited in the compact plaque. They are excellent parents, and I recommend them highly. If you want to start with a small hemichromine cichlid, these guys are ideal. They're totally innocuous in their behavior towards other fish, and in fact, they tend to be on the shy side if you don't keep them in a tank with some kind of schooling dither fish. They do require a fairly large tank if you want to breed them, because the spawns are very large. It's not unusual for a pair of these guys to kick out 500 or 600 eggs. And those babies are going to require growing space if you want to have luck in raising them. Excellent community fish. They're not picky about water chemistry. I find that they're more attractively colored in soft water, but a pH range of 5.5 to 7.5 works quite nicely for them. Again, they don't like abrupt changes in pH, and they're quite sensitive to dissolved waste, so frequent partial water changes if you want to keep them successfully. Same temperature ranges for the larger hemichromis. They neither eat plants nor do they dig them up during spawning time. In fact, they look a lot happier, and they seem to be more comfortable in a well-planted aquarium. And again, they're not fussy eaters. If they can fit it in their mouth, live frozen and prepared, work quite nicely. I will say they are inordinately fond of both bloodworms and glassworms. In fact, if you want to bring them into breeding condition rapidly, I strongly recommend feeding these two particular foods as a regular part of the diet. This is topotypical Animalochromis thomasii. Thomasii was described from Sierra Leone, and the first person to bring these guys back to the aquarium hobby was Erhard Roloff. As I say, Roloff was primarily a killie person, but he wasn't above bringing back the occasional dwarf cichlid if it really pushed his buttons, which is why we have a Pelvicochromis roloffi named in his honor. But Roloff was the first person to bring these little guys back to Europe, and they were an instant hit, and it's very easy to understand why. They're sometimes called West African butterfly cichlids because they've been compared with the South American ram as far as color pattern goes. Again, a very peaceful fish, very easy to breed, excellent parents, a very good beginner's dwarf cichlid in all respects. To the east of Sierra Leone, we have the country of Liberia. And in Liberia, there's another distinctive Animalochromis species. These guys have a bright red eye, and every scale of the upper lateral line has a black dot on it. These guys were episodically available in the hobby in the 1980s and 90s. And I know they were bred successfully in Japan because I have a copy of a Japanese aquarium magazine with an article that shows a pair of these guys spawning and raising their young. I don't believe we have them in the hobby anymore. I think we lost them. And again, given that Liberia is not the easiest or safest place in the world to go collecting fish in nowadays, I'm not holding my breath until we get them back again. To the north of Sierra Leone is the country of Guinea. And there's a very distinctive Anomalochromis species that comes from that country. These guys at all times are distinctly barred in the flanks. And when I examined preserved material of this animal that was from the collections in the Paris Museum, I noticed the barring, and I assumed that these animals had been sexually active fish when they were collected. And I thought we were simply looking at Thomisi that were breeding coloration, because Tommies do tend to develop an indistinct pattern of vertical barring on the flanks when they're breeding. And it wasn't until I got a hold of some live animals that it became obvious that I had missed the mark on this. And I should have described that animal when I had the chance, but didn't. It remains undescribed. It certainly ought to be, because it's definitely not the same species as topotypical Thomisi from Sierra Leone. It is the, shall we say, feistiest of the Anomalochromis. These guys are a little bit testier in a community situation than their relatives to the south, but it's not unmanageable. And again, it's a very easily bred fish and a superb parent. These guys are regularly available because we are getting stuff out of Guinea on an ongoing basis. Wet Spot almost always has them available. And as they say, if you want a good beginner's dwarf cichlid from West Africa, this is a really nice fish to start with. And again, the little red indication is it's the westernmost representative of the group. Unfortunately, in addition to being very good aquarium fish, Hemichromis have managed to make a pest out of themselves in a number of places where they don't belong. Some irresponsible aquarists dumped a pair or two of Hemichromis guttatus into Cuatro Ciénegas in northern Mexico. Cuatro Ciénegas is an amazing place. It's basically an aquatic Galapagos. Virtually everything in that basin is endemic. It has an endemic cichlid, Hericles minklei. It has a number of very attractive killies and live bearers, a very attractive minnow, an endemic subspecies of the Mexican tetra. And I am not particularly worried about Hemichromis guttatus having a negative impact on Hericles minklei, because Hericles minklei is one of the nastiest pieces of work I have encountered in almost 60 years of cichlid keeping. They are quite capable of taking care of themselves. On the other hand, remember that red jewelfish are almost specialist predators on smaller fish. And I do worry about the impact that they will have on fish like Lucania interioris, some of the pupfish species, and some of the live bearers. There's a group of dedicated Mexican conservationists that have been trying to net this fish out of Cuatro Ciénegas. They basically make a trip every year, catch as many as they can, drop them into alcohol, and hope they solve the problem. The problem is red jewelfish are prolific. All you have to do is miss one pair, and a year later, you're practically back to where you were in the first place. So here again, this is an example of an animal out of place causing problems. And unfortunately, this is one case where the responsibility for this problem falls squarely on the shoulder of aquarium hobbyists, which is not a good state of affairs. We also have a feral population of Hemichromis letournoi in southern Florida. I'm not sure whether we have an irresponsible hobbyist or a careless fish farmer to blame for this. But the animal is there. It's been there now for almost 25 years, so it's not going anywhere. It doesn't seem to be spreading. Again, this rather surprises me, because basically Hemichromis have all the characteristics of a good invasive species. That it's letournoi in Florida doesn't surprise me. Remember, letournoi is not a tropical fish. The type population occurs in a Mediterranean climate, and there's absolutely no reason why this animal can't survive the occasional cold snap in southern Florida. So I don't think it's going anywhere. That said, the small fish there have had to deal with centrarchid predation, not to mention gars, for a long time, and they're pretty well adapted in terms of being able to deal with predatory fish. So I don't think that letournoi is going to have the same impact in southern Florida that guttatus is having, or potentially can have in Cuatro Ciénegas. But that doesn't alter the fact that as aquarists, we should responsibly keep these animals in our tank and not turn them loose when we get tired of them. This is what's called preparing a rod for your own back, because it simply gives the people that are out to get the aquarium hobby something to beat us with. I've mentioned in the past that there are parts of Africa that are not the easiest part of the world to collect fish in. And it's very reasonable to ask, can we always count on a reliable and stable supply of wild-caught West African cichlids or any other West African fish? Well, leaving apart the problem, the fact that a lot of these countries are not noted for their political stability, West Africa has lost a tremendous amount of forest cover. And if you want to look at a poster child for deforestation, West Africa is a far more potent example than either the Amazon or Southeast Asia. At the beginning of the colonial period, the two colonial powers in West Africa, France and England, realizing that tropical hardwoods were a very valuable resource, carried out very detailed studies to determine exactly how much forest they had in their respective colonies. And here we have a graphic that indicates forest cover present in Nigeria and Ghana, which were part of the British Raj, and Ivory Coast, which is part of the French Empire. And as you can see, that since the beginning of the 20th century, these countries have lost virtually all their primary forest cover. The forest that we have left in these countries is primarily second growth forest. And the problem with that is that there's a wide suite of African cichlids, and in fact West African fish in general, that are absolutely dependent on forests to maintain appropriate water chemistry and conditions. There are plenty of candidates in West Africa, unfortunately, for captive breeding programs under the auspices of CARES. Certainly all the Barombi and bowfish fall in that category. Limbochromis robertsi, which is trembling on the verge of extinction in western Ghana. And the two Nigerian species that we really should give some serious thought to are Hemichromis cristatus and Pelvicochromis sylviae. These animals have very restricted ranges. They live in a part of Nigeria that has not only suffered deforestation, but that's been very negatively impacted by petroleum extraction. So the reason I'm concerned about this is that I can remember a time when both cristatus and sylviae, which we were calling yellow cribs at the time, regularly appeared in shipments of fish that were exported out of Lagos in Nigeria. Well, I haven't seen wild cristatus in close to 20 years. Sylviae we have again. And I am very concerned that it's quite possible that cristatus may no longer exist in the wild. And unfortunately, we don't have it in captivity anymore either. So getting a hold of a founder population of this animal to work with is a really high priority. And again, once we can get a hold of live animals, it really should become a priority animal for the CARES program. So we continue to have this very attractive fish in the hobby. And as I say, the cupboard is not bare. I don't think we've made all the discoveries that remain to be made with regard to the genus Hemichromis. Because while the maps that I showed you may give you the impression that Africa has been thoroughly studied with regard to its freshwater fish fauna, that's a very deceptive series of maps. There are a lot of rivers that have never been thoroughly sampled. And there are a lot of rivers in West Africa that are characterized by great differences between what you find above and below a set of waterfalls. And a classical example of this is this species from Guinea, Hemichromis colente from the type locality. Now, during the course of doing my master's work, I looked at an awful lot of preserved Hemichromis material that was collected in Guinea and deposited in the Paris Museum. And I will tell you right now, in the several hundred specimens that I looked at, I never found an animal whose melanophore pattern looked like this. This came as a complete surprise to me when I first saw the live animals. It's a member of the cristatus group. It's somewhat anomalous in its coloration. There's relatively little red on this fish, but a lot of blue and yellow. Very attractive animal. And again, the only reason we know about this is because it came out essentially and as a shipment in the shipment aquarium fish. So there are still surprises waiting for us in the genus Hemichromis in Africa. So if you like West African cichlids, if you like medium-sized cichlids, these are the fish for you. I really enjoy these animals. I always like having at least one species around. You may have to look to find some of these animals, but it's well worth the trouble. So enjoy your red cichlids, and I'll be glad to try to answer, because God knows whether I'll be able to hear you, any questions that you might have about the program. So stay well, and hopefully we'll be seeing you face-to-face sometime in the not-too-distant future.
Okay, folks. Again, my apologies for little technical difficulties in the beginning there. Thanks for sticking with us, because as you just saw, it was a informative and always thorough presentation by Dr. Loiselle. I'm checking, Doc. I don't see, you were so thorough that I don't see any questions other than where we were for the first 5 minutes. Let me check again. Nope. I don't see any questions for you, Doc. So,
can anyone hear me?
yep. So without further ado, thank you, folks, and we'll please do it again next month for another excellent presentation. Thanks for bearing with us, and see you next month.